When they laughed in my face and called me too emotional, they never imagined my silence would become the sharpest blade. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight back in the moment. I only needed to watch quietly, to observe every detail, every transgression, every dirty secret they thought was buried. They mistook my quietness for weakness, my composure for surrender. But behind my calm exterior, a fury was building, controlled, calculated, patient. And when the time came, that quiet fury would cost them everything they'd built, millions of dollars, their reputations, their futures. My name is Ava Morgan, and for the past 6 years, I've worn the same mask to work every single day. The one that says I'm fine with being overlooked, fine with being dismissed, fine with being the token female voice in a boardroom full of men who've already made up their minds before I even open my mouth. The Stonebridge Capitol building rises 42 floors above downtown Denver. All glass and steel reaching toward the Colorado sky like a monument to ambition. From the outside, it's pristine, impressive. The kind of place young finance graduates dream about working. Inside, on the 38th floor where the legal compliance department operates, it's a different story entirely. Every morning at 7:45, I badge in through security, my heels clicking against marble floors that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The elevator ride gives me exactly 90 seconds to arrange my features into what I call my office face. Pleasant, but not too friendly. Competent, but not threatening. Present, but never too loud. Our department occupies the northwest corner, with floor-to-ceiling windows that should feel liberating but instead feel like a fishbowl. 23 employees, 17 men, 6 women. 3 of us in positions that actually matter. And even then, matter is a generous term when every suggestion we make gets filtered through the real decision-makers. All of them men who went to the same Ivy League schools, play golf at the same country clubs, and somehow always have time for 3 martini lunches while the rest of us eat salads at our desks. My cubicle sits between Brad Henderson's corner office and the break room, which means I hear every conversation I'm not supposed to hear. Brad's been the department head for 8 years, a Yale man with silver temples and a voice that carries the kind of authority that comes from never being questioned. To his left, Michael Torres, deputy head, Harvard Business School, always ready with a patronizing smile and a, well, actually, whenever I speak. Then there's James Park, senior analyst, who once told me I was surprisingly analytical for someone so emotional. The word follows me like a shadow in this place, emotional. They weaponized it the first time I raised concerns about inconsistencies in our risk assessment reports. It was a Tuesday afternoon, conference room B, the light streaming in, harsh and unforgiving. I had spreadsheets, charts, 3 months of data showing we were exposed to litigation that could cost us millions. I was 2 minutes into my presentation when Brad held up his hand. Ava, I appreciate your passion, but aren't you being a bit emotional about this? The room chuckled. 12 men in identical navy suits, synchronized in their dismissal. The 2 other women present suddenly found their laptops fascinating. That's how it works here. You're not wrong. You're emotional. You're not thorough. You're overthinking. You're not advocating for the company. You're overreacting. Every valid concern gets repackaged as female hysteria. Every data-driven argument dismissed as unnecessary worry. The break room conversations I'm not part of but can't help overhearing paint the picture clearly enough. She's good with details, they say, like it's a consolation prize. Very thorough with documentation. Never brilliant, never strategic, never leadership material. Just good with details, like a well-trained secretary from the 1950s who somehow learned to use Excel. But I keep showing up, every day, same mask, same pleasant smile, when Brad asks me to grab coffee for the client meetings I'm not invited to attend. Same measured tone when presenting findings that get credited to Michael in the quarterly reports. Same professional demeanor when James explains my own work back to me in meetings, as if I hadn't spent 60 hours compiling that exact information. The culture here isn't just male-dominated, it's male-celebrated. Every wall features photos of past executives, a progressive timeline of white men in dark suits. Their smiles growing more confident as the decades advance, but the diversity never improving. The unspoken rule is clear. This is their world. Women are guests, tolerated as long as we don't get too loud, too ambitious, too emotional. They have no idea that my silence isn't submission. It's observation, every dismissive comment, every stolen idea. Every moment they've mistaken my composure for weakness. I remember them all. They think I'm just another emotional woman who'll eventually burn out or transfer to a better fit department, something in HR maybe, where feelings are acceptable. They're wrong. My quiet fury has been building for 2,191 days. And unlike my emotions, numbers don't lie. The moment that changed everything happened on a Thursday in March. The conference room was too cold. The way Brad liked it, claiming it, kept everyone sharp. I'd prepared for weeks for this presentation, our quarterly risk assessment for the new municipal bond portfolio. The numbers were alarming. We were exposed to nearly $400 million in potential liability if even one of 3 key municipalities defaulted. And I'd found irregularities in their financial disclosures that everyone else had mysteriously overlooked. I stood at the head of the table, my laser pointer steady despite the tremor in my chest. If you'll turn to page 12, you'll see the correlation between the reported revenues and actual tax collections, doesn't? Ava. Brad's voice cut through like a blade. We've reviewed this already. No, sir, this is new data from... You're overreacting. He didn't even look at the slides. These municipalities have been stable for decades. Michael leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk playing at his lips. I think what Ava doesn't understand is that we have relationships with these clients. Sometimes the numbers don't tell the whole story. The numbers tell us we're exposed to fraud, I said, my voice firm. The discrepancies. Are you calling our clients fraudulent? James interrupted, his tone mock horrified. That's quite an emotional accusation. There it was, emotional. The word that turned facts into feelings, data into drama. I'm presenting documented evidence of... Brad stood up, his 6'3" frame designed to intimidate. Ava, you're clearly passionate about this, which we appreciate, but maybe you're too close to it, too invested. Why don't you take the rest of the day? Clear your head. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector still displaying my meticulous research. 17 faces, not one meeting my eyes. Sarah from acquisitions studied her manicure. Even Linda, who'd started the same week as me, suddenly needed to check her phone. I'm not being emotional, I said quietly. I'm being accurate. Brad's laugh was paternal, condescending. See? This is what I mean. You're taking this personally. Jim, why don't you review Ava's work and present the sanitized version next week? Sanitized, as if my thoroughness was contamination. I gathered my materials slowly, deliberately, refusing to rush despite the burning in my throat. As I reached the door, I heard Brad say, "This is why I prefer working with men. Less drama." The laughter followed me down the hall. That afternoon, I sat in my cubicle staring at the email that arrived 20 minutes after the meeting. I'd been removed from the Morrison Industries account. To reduce your workload, Brad explained. The project I'd developed from scratch for 8 months, handed to Michael. The Tokyo conference I'd been promised, James would be attending instead. Better optics, the email said. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. How is the big presentation? I couldn't respond. How do you explain that being right doesn't matter when they've already decided you're wrong? How do you describe the weight of being dismissed not for your work, but for your chromosomes? The worst part wasn't the meeting, it was the aftermath. The next morning, Michael presented my risk assessment almost word for word, minus the warnings. When the board praised his thoroughness, he actually said, I had to calm down some of the more alarmist projections from the team. But I think we found the right balance. I watched from my desk as he accepted congratulations for my work, my research, my sleepless nights. When he passed my cubicle later, he actually winked. Thanks for the groundwork. Ava. I simplified it for the boys upstairs. You know how it is. Sometimes a masculine perspective helps clarify things. The small indignities accumulated like paper cuts, being asked to take notes in meetings where I was supposed to be a participant, having my suggestions repeated by male colleagues 5 minutes later to sudden approval, watching promotions go to men who'd been there half as long but played golf with the right people, being told I was lucky to have a seat at the table as if my J.D. from Northwestern and 6 years of spotless performance were charitable donations rather than qualifications. The whispers in the break room became less subtle. She's wound too tight. Probably that time of the month. No wonder she's single. Who'd want to deal with that at home? They dissected my ambition like a pathology, my competence like a threat. But the deepest wound came in April when Brad called me into his office for my annual review. "You're technically proficient," he said, as if technical proficiency wasn't the actual job. "But you need to work on your soft skills. You come across as..." He paused, searching for the right euphemism. "Intense. It makes people uncomfortable. Have you considered being more approachable? Smiling more?" I had 2 master's degrees and a perfect compliance record. Michael had been fined twice by the SEC for oversights, but I needed to smile more. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the city lights, my laptop open to resignation letter templates. The fury inside me had crystallized into something harder, colder. They wanted me to smile. They wanted me to be less emotional. Fine, I'd give them exactly what they wanted. A perfectly pleasant, completely silent Ava Morgan. And while they were busy congratulating themselves on finally breaking me, I'd be watching, listening, documenting. They'd made one crucial mistake. They'd taught me exactly how much my emotion was worth to them. Nothing. Which meant I had nothing left to lose. I became a ghost in plain sight. Every morning, I arrived at 7:30, sharp, 30 minutes before most of the department. Those quiet moments in the empty office became my hunting ground. Brad's assistant didn't lock her desk drawer, sloppy, but useful. The printer history showed every document that passed through, including the ones they thought they'd deleted. The shredder bin was emptied only twice a week, and security cameras didn't cover the corner where it sat. I started small, memorizing patterns. Brad always printed sensitive documents on Tuesday mornings before the partners' call. Michael used his assistant's computer for personal emails, thinking it was more secure. James had a habit of discussing deals on his cell in the stairwell, believing the concrete provided privacy. He was wrong. The acoustics carried beautifully to the landing below. My desk position, once a reminder of my insignificance, became my advantage. I could see Brad's screen reflected in the window when he turned his monitor at just the right angle. I heard every speakerphone call through the thin walls. When they gathered in his office for their unofficial meetings, the ones where real decisions were made, their voices carried through the air vent. The first real discovery came in May. A series of trades executed just days before a municipal bond announcement. The timing was too perfect, the amounts too specific. I photocopied the records during lunch, my heart steady as a metronome. No emotion, just documentation. Then came the Riverside account. On paper, it was clean. A standard portfolio for a pension fund. But the fee structure didn't match our standard templates. They were skimming, not obviously, not crudely, but with the kind of sophisticated theft that required 3 people to sign off. Brad, Michael, and James. Their signatures were right there, buried in Appendix C of a document no one was supposed to read that carefully. I read everything carefully now. My methodology was meticulous. Every document photographed with my personal phone, then backed up to 3 different cloud services. Every overheard conversation typed into encrypted notes within minutes. Every suspicious email forwarded to my personal account before being deleted from my sent folder. I created a paper trail they didn't know existed, a parallel set of books that told the real story of Stonebridge Capital. The pattern became clearer with each passing week. The municipal bonds I'd warned about, they were knowingly selling toxic assets to state pension funds. The risk assessments they'd dismissed, deliberately buried to maintain plausible deniability, The stable municipalities Michael praised, shell companies funneling money to offshore accounts. I found myself staying later, not because I was behind on work, but because 7 p.m. was when they got careless. When the wine came out at strategy sessions, when Brad would laugh about those idiots at the SEC who couldn't find anything even with a roadmap, when James would brag about his Cayman Islands fishing trips, the transformation in my behavior was surgical. I smiled at Brad every morning, asked about his golf game. I thanked Michael when he explained my own reports to me. I laughed at James's jokes about emotional women. They thought they'd won, that they'd finally domesticated me. Brad even commented in a meeting. See how much better things are when Ava isn't being so intense? They had no idea that every smile was a camera click. Every nod was another document archived. Every pleasant, "Of course, sir," was another piece of evidence cataloged. In July, I discovered the masterpiece of their corruption. A $50 million discrepancy in the Morrison Industries account, the one they'd removed me from. The money had been moved through 17 different transactions, each small enough to avoid detection, but together forming a clear pattern of embezzlement. The authorization codes traced back to their logins. They hadn't even been clever enough to use proxies. I sat in the bathroom stall looking at the evidence on my phone, my hands perfectly steady, no racing heart, no sweaty palms. The fury had crystallized into something beyond emotion, pure, cold purpose. They'd called me too emotional to handle the big accounts, then used those same accounts to steal millions. The irony was almost poetic. By August, I had 8 months of evidence. Insider trading, embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, enough to bury them 10 times over. But I kept collecting, kept watching. A wolf doesn't strike at the first sign of weakness. It waits for the perfect moment when the prey is most vulnerable, most confident in its safety. They made it easy. Their arrogance was so complete they'd stopped seeing me entirely. I was furniture, a pleasant piece of office decoration that filed reports and fetched coffee. During their closed-door meetings, they didn't even lower their voices anymore. Why would they? I was just Ava, too emotional to understand the real game, too beaten down to cause trouble. One afternoon, Brad actually patted me on the shoulder after I'd agreed to redo a report to hide more inconsistencies. "This is the Ava we always knew was in there," he said. "So much better than all that unnecessary drama before." I smiled warmly. "I've learned so much from watching you work." "Brad." It was the truest thing I'd ever said to him. I had learned. I'd learned how they operated, where they hid their crimes, how they covered their tracks. I'd learned that they weren't just dismissive misogynists, they were criminals who used sexism as a shield, knowing that any woman who challenged them would be labeled hysterical before she could be heard. But most importantly, I'd learned that silence wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was the deadliest weapon of all. The wolf was ready. All that remained was choosing the moment to bare my teeth. The isolation crept in like fog, slow and suffocating. "Are you coming to drinks tonight?" Sarah asked one Friday in September, hovering by my cubicle with forced casualness. "Can't make it," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "Need to finish these reports." She shifted uncomfortably. "You never come anymore." I finally met her eyes, saw the mixture of pity and relief there. She was glad I'd stopped fighting. But being around me still felt like standing too close to a live wire. Maybe next time. We both knew there wouldn't be a next time. The office happy hours, the lunch groups, the coffee runs. I'd been systematically excluded from all of them. Not officially, of course. The invitations still came, but they were hollow, delivered with the hope I'd decline. When I did show up, conversations died, laughter became forced. I was the reminder of what happened to women who didn't play along. Even Linda and Sarah, the only other women in positions of relative authority, kept their distance now. They'd learned the lesson my humiliation was meant to teach. Stay quiet, stay pleasant, stay employed. They smiled at Brad's jokes about emotional women, laughed when Michael called me intense, nodded when James suggested I needed to be more of a team player. Their survival depended on distinguishing themselves from me. The cautionary tale. At home, the isolation followed me like a shadow. My apartment in Capitol Hill, once a sanctuary, became a storage unit for evidence and exhaustion. Boxes of copied documents hidden in the bedroom closet. External hard drives tucked behind books. Every surface covered with the detritus of a life consumed by documentation. "You're different," Marcus said over dinner in October, the last dinner we'd ever have. We'd been together 2 years, and I watched him push pasta around his plate, unable to meet my eyes. "Different how?" "Obsessed? You're always working, always distracted. Even when you're here, you're not really here." He wasn't wrong. While he talked about his day, I was mentally cataloging Brad's latest trades. During movies, I was planning how to photograph documents without triggering security protocols. In bed, I stared at the ceiling, calculating how many counts of fraud I could prove. "I'm dealing with something at work," I said carefully. "You're always dealing with something at work." His frustration finally boiled over. "Christ, Ava, you used to be fun. Now you're just angry all the time. It's exhausting." "I'm not angry," I lied. "No, you're something worse. You're—" He searched for the word. "Calculating. Cold. It's like you're planning something all the time, and it's creepy." He left that night. Packed his things while I sat on the couch, feeling nothing. Another casualty of the war I was fighting alone. My sister called less frequently, tired of conversations that went nowhere. Friends stopped inviting me out after too many declined invitations. My mother asked if I was depressed, suggested therapy, maybe medication. How could I explain that depression wasn't the problem? That the ice in my veins wasn't mental illness but clarity? That every relationship I lost was worth it if it meant those bastards would pay? The lowest point came in November. I'd spent Thanksgiving alone, Chinese takeout and spreadsheets, when I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Hollow eyes, sharp cheekbones, skin pale from too many late nights under fluorescent lights. I looked like what I'd become, a ghost haunting my own life. For one moment, just one, I wondered if they were right. If I was just an emotional woman who'd snapped, who'd invented conspiracies to explain my own failures. Maybe the documents were misunderstood. Maybe the patterns I saw were projections of my own rage. Then I remembered Brad's voice. "This is why I prefer working with men." No, they weren't right. They were criminals who'd weaponized misogyny to protect their crimes. Every friend I'd lost, every relationship that crumbled, every moment of soul-crushing loneliness, it was all fuel for what was coming. I went back to my laptop, pulled up the evidence files. 847 documents, 200 hours of recorded conversations. Enough financial crime to make Enron look like a parking violation. They'd taken everything from me, my career advancement, my reputation, my relationships, my peace of mind. They'd stripped me down to nothing but rage and evidence. They had no idea that nothing was exactly what made me dangerous. The network building began in December, during the chaos of holiday parties and year-end reviews. Catherine Walsh found me first. Or maybe I found her. It was hard to tell with someone that sharp. She was a financial journalist with the Denver Post, known for breaking the Colton Industries scandal 2 years prior. We met at a Starbucks in Lodo, far from the financial district's prying eyes. "Why me?" she asked, stirring her black coffee with deliberate slowness. "Because you don't pull punches. And because you understand what it's like to be dismissed as too aggressive for doing your job." Her smile was razor thin. "Show me what you have." I slid her a flash drive containing just enough to prove I wasn't another disgruntled employee with delusions. 10 minutes of scrolling through documents. Her expression shifted from skeptical to hungry. "Jesus Christ, this is the tip of the iceberg. Why haven't you gone to the SEC?" "Because the SEC takes years, seals records, and cuts deals. I want them destroyed, not fined." She studied me with the kind of intensity that had probably unnerved countless sources. This is dangerous. They'll come after you legally, professionally, personally. They already have. I have nothing left for them to take. The second piece of my network was Thomas Chen, no relation despite the name coincidence. A securities lawyer who'd left corporate practice to become a whistleblower attorney. His office was a cramped space above a Vietnamese restaurant, a far cry from the marble and mahogany of big law firms. You need protection, he said after reviewing my evidence. Legal immunity, witness protection potentially. I need them to burn. That's not how the law works. Then make it work that way. He laughed, short and bitter. You remind me of why I left corporate law. Fine. We do this right. We can trigger criminal investigations, not just civil penalties. But you need more than documents. You need recordings, witnesses, concrete proof of intent. I have all of that. Then you need to be invisible while we build the case. Any sign you're the source, and they'll destroy you before the story breaks. The recording equipment came from an online retailer, shipped to a P.O. box I'd opened under a variant of my middle name. Tiny devices that looked like USB drives, phone apps that recorded with screen off, a pen that captured 8 hours of audio. I became a walking surveillance system, every conversation potentially evidence. January brought the most damaging recordings. Brad, drunk at the partner's New Year's party, bragging about the idiots at the pension funds who trusted their assessments. Michael, in the men's room, the acoustics carried to the hallway, discussing which regulatory officials were friendly to their cause. James, on a call he thought was private, explicitly discussing destroying documents before the quarterly audit. I fed Catherine information in careful doses, enough to keep her engaged, but not enough to run with half the story. Each document was verified, cross-referenced, supported by multiple sources. She began building a companion narrative, interviewing former employees who'd been similarly silenced, finding patterns of discrimination that created the perfect environment for fraud. Meanwhile, Thomas constructed the legal framework. SEC whistleblower complaints, FBI Financial Crimes Unit reports, State Attorney General notifications. Every agency that could possibly claim jurisdiction would receive packages simultaneously, preventing any single entity from burying the story. The most delicate acquisition came in February. Michael's assistant, Jennifer, was 7 months pregnant and had just been told her position was being restructured after her maternity leave, eliminated, essentially. I found her crying in the parking garage. They can't do this, she sobbed. I have emails where they promised. Jennifer. I kept my voice steady, gentle. Do you have access to Michael's calendar history? She looked up, mascara streaking. Why? Because I'm going to make them pay for every woman they've wronged. But I need proof of their meetings with the shell companies. She stared at me for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. I have screenshots of everything. I knew something was wrong, but I needed this job. You won't after this. Trust me. By March, I had 4 other insiders, women who'd been groped at office parties and told to lighten up, assistants who'd watched their bosses forge signatures, junior analysts who'd been ordered to falsify reports, then threatened into silence, each one angry, each one ready to talk, each one providing another angle of proof. The network was complete. A journalist hungry for a Pulitzer, a lawyer with an axe to grind against corporate corruption, 5 corroborating witnesses, and me, the ghost in the machine, coordinating it all while maintaining my mask of pleasant submission. Catherine called me one night in early April. We're ready. Can you get me the final quarter's reports? They come out Monday. I'll have them Sunday night. How? Brad always reviews them Sunday afternoon, alone, in the office. He leaves his computer unlocked when he goes to the bathroom. That's a huge risk. I thought about the promotion I'd never get, the relationship that had crumbled, the friends who'd disappeared. What's one more? Ava. Why are you really doing this? It can't just be about justice. I was quiet for a moment, listening to the rain against my apartment windows. They called me emotional, said I was too sensitive for this business. They were right about one thing. I am emotional. I'm furious. And fury, properly channeled, is the most powerful force in the world. Remind me never to piss you off. Too late for them. Sunday, April 14th, 3:47 p.m. The office was tomb silent except for the hum of servers and the distant sound of Brad's music, Sinatra. Because of course it was. Security had nodded at me absently, used to seeing me work weekends, just dedicated Ava, always going the extra mile. I waited by the printers, organizing papers I'd already organized 3 times. Brad's bathroom breaks were predictable, every 2 hours, like clockwork. The coffee he mainlined guaranteed it. 3:52 p.m. His office door opened. Footsteps down the hall. The men's room door closed. I moved quickly but naturally, like I was simply walking to his office to drop off a report. His computer screen glowed with the final quarterly numbers, the real ones, before they'd be sanitized for tomorrow's release. My USB drive slid in smoothly. The auto-run program copying everything in 45 seconds. His emails, his personal folders, the hidden partition he thought I didn't know about. 30 seconds. His bathroom visits averaged 3 minutes. 20 seconds. The progress bar crawled across my phone screen. 10 seconds. A door opened somewhere, not the bathroom. Just the stairwell. Complete? I pulled the drive, slipped it into my pocket, and was examining the view from his window when he returned. Ava, what are you doing here? I turned with a practiced smile. Sorry, Brad. I left my analysis on your desk Friday and needed it for tomorrow. Your door was open. He relaxed, already dismissing me. No problem. Actually, good timing. Can you grab me a fresh coffee? This is going to be a long night. Of course. As I made his coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, exactly how he'd demanded it for 6 years, I felt the USB drive burning in my pocket. Everything we needed was on there. Every crime, every cover-up, every trail leading directly to their personal accounts. That evening, I met Catherine in a 24-hour diner in Aurora. She looked at the drive like it was the Holy Grail. This is it? Everything. Financial records, personal emails, documentation of destroyed evidence. There's even a spreadsheet where James tracked their illegal profits by month. Jesus, they really thought they were untouchable. They were. Until now. She plugged the drive into her laptop, her eyes widening as she scrolled. Ava, there's evidence here of bribing federal regulators. Check folder 16. This is enough to take down half the financial district. Good, Thomas called while we were reviewing. The FBI is ready to move as soon as the story breaks. They want to coordinate raids with your publication. Catherine checked her phone. My editor is holding the front page for Tuesday. Gives us Monday to verify final details. Contact them for comment. They'll deny everything, I said. Of course, but we have receipts. Literal receipts. Monday was surreal. I sat at my desk, responding to emails, filing reports, smiling at Brad when he complimented my weekend work. They were planning their week, their quarter, their bonuses. The Morrison deal was closing Thursday, another $15 million in fees, of which they'd skim their usual percentage. At lunch, Michael actually invited me to join them, a rare honor. You've really turned things around, Ava, he said over sushi. I told Brad we should consider you for the Singapore conference. That's very kind, Michael. James laughed. See? Much better than all that emotional nonsense before. Women just need proper guidance. I smiled, thinking about the FBI warrant with his name on it. You've all taught me so much. At 4 p.m., Catherine texted, Legal approved, story goes live at midnight. Comments sent to Stonebridge PR at 3:45. At 4:15, Brad's assistant rushed into his office. Through the glass. I watched his face change from confusion to rage to something that looked like fear. Michael's phone rang, then James's. At 4:30, the head of PR arrived, followed by 3 lawyers from legal. The conference room filled with suits and panic. At 5 employees started receiving emails to work from home Tuesday due to building maintenance. At 5:30, Brad stood in my cubicle doorway. His face was marble, his voice carefully controlled. Ava, you wouldn't know anything about a Denver Post inquiry, would you? I looked up with practiced confusion. An inquiry about what? He studied my face, searching for cracks, finding none. Never mind, have a good evening. At 6 I shut down my computer for the last time, packed my personal items into a small box. 6 years reduced to a box of office supplies and a coffee mug. Security was distracted, watching something on their phones. As I passed, I glimpsed the Denver Post website. Breaking at midnight, major financial firm under investigation. Outside, the April evening was crisp and clear. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the tower of glass and steel. Somewhere up there, they were scrambling, trying to figure out how to spin this, who to blame, what to destroy. Too late. I opened my phone to Catherine's text. It's done. Story drops in 6 hours. You should be somewhere public when it hits, for safety. I thought about going to a bar, watching it unfold on the news. But no, I'd spent months in shadows and silence. I'd earned the right to witness their destruction alone, in peace. I went home, poured a glass of wine, and waited. At 11:59, I refreshed the Denver Post homepage. At midnight, the headline appeared, Stonebridge Capital exposed, massive fraud, embezzlement, and culture of corruption. Subheading, exclusive, internal documents reveal years of criminal conduct by senior management. My phone exploded with notifications. The story was already being picked up by Bloomberg, Reuters, CNN. I turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and sat in the dark. The quiet fury had been unleashed. Now came the reckoning. Tuesday morning, chaos. I watched from my neighborhood coffee shop as the news cycles devoured Stonebridge Capital. Every screen showed the same footage. FBI agents carrying boxes from the building. Brad being led away in handcuffs, his silver temples catching the light as cameras flashed. Michael tried to hide his face behind a briefcase. James stumbled on the courthouse steps, his lawyer steadying him. The headlines evolved hourly. Stonebridge Capital trading suspended. $400 million in fraudulent transactions uncovered. Federal raids across 3 states in Stonebridge scandal. My phone, turned back on, had 247 missed calls. Former colleagues, reporters, investigators. I ignored them all except Thomas. You need to come in for the deposition, he said, with immunity guaranteed. Tomorrow. Let them twist today. The financial blogs dissected the evidence with surgical precision. The forged documents I'd captured, the bribes meticulously documented, Jennifer's screenshots showing premeditated pregnancy discrimination. The recorded conversations where they'd laughed about destroying people's retirements. By noon, Stonebridge's stock had dropped 67%. By close of market, it was down 84%. $23 billion in market value. Evaporated, Catherine called, breathless with adrenaline. The SEC just announced emergency asset freezes, personal accounts, everything. Brad's yacht, Michael's art collection, James's property portfolio, all frozen pending investigation. Good. My source at the FBI says they're looking at RICO charges. This could be criminal conspiracy at the enterprise level. RICO, the law designed for taking down organized crime. Fitting. Wednesday brought my deposition. 8 hours in a federal building, walking investigators through every document, every recording, every moment of discovery. The lead FBI agent, a woman named Director Harrison, listened with an intensity that reminded me why I'd done this. The culture you're describing, she said carefully, it wasn't just discrimination. It was deliberate suppression of oversight. They knew I'd found the fraud. They discredited me as emotional, specifically to prevent anyone from taking my warning seriously. The misogyny was a tool. The perfect tool. Who believes in hysterical women over successful men? She smiled grimly. We do. Now. Thursday's news was even better. The investigation had spread. 17 more arrests across the financial sector. Everyone who'd taken bribes, facilitated transactions, looked the other way. The pension fund Stonebridge had defrauded announced civil suits seeking $1.8 billion in damages. Linda called that evening. First time we'd spoken in months. "It was you," she said simply. "I don't know what you mean." "Ava, thank you. They did the same thing to me 5 years ago. But I didn't have the courage to fight back. It wasn't courage, it was rage. Same thing, sometimes." Friday brought personal devastation for the 3 architects of my humiliation. Brad's wife filed for divorce, claiming she'd discovered hidden assets through the news coverage. Michael's Bar Association announced an ethics investigation that would certainly end his legal career. James was named personally in 7 civil suits, his entire net worth insufficient to cover potential damages. But the true poetry came in the details Catherine published in her follow-up pieces. Their emails, exposed to the world. Brad writing that emotional women are easier to manage than competent ones. Michael suggesting they keep the females busy with meaningless work. James's spreadsheet ranking female employees by likelihood to cause trouble. Every woman who'd ever been dismissed, belittled, or broken by them saw those words. The lawsuit announcements began flooding in. Hostile work environment, systematic discrimination, constructive dismissal. By the second week, Stonebridge Capital ceased to exist. The name became toxic. The assets sold off piecemeal to competitors. The building I'd spent 6 years in was already being rebranded. I met with Director Harrison one more time, signing final testimonies. "Where will you go now?" she asked. "I don't know. Away from finance, certainly." "You'd make a good investigator." "I'm tired of investigating, tired of fighting. I just want to be—" She nodded. "For what it's worth, what you did was extraordinary. You saved thousands of people's retirements. I didn't do it for them." "I know. That's what makes it even more impressive." 3 weeks after the story broke, I saw Brad on the news one last time. Federal courthouse, orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front. The reporter caught him at the door. "Mr. Henderson, any comment on the charges?" He looked directly at the camera, and for a moment, I thought he was looking at me. This was a vindictive attack by a disgruntled, emotional former employee who couldn't handle the pressure of— His lawyer grabbed his arm, shutting him up, but the damage was done. Even facing 20 years in prison, he couldn't help himself. I was still just an emotional woman to him. Except this emotional woman had destroyed him. Completely. Irrevocably. The trials would take years. The sentences would be severe. Financial crime at this level, with this much evidence, meant decades in federal prison. Their families were ruined. Their legacies destroyed. Their names would forever be synonymous with corruption and disgrace. All because they dismissed me as too emotional. The fury that had sustained me for months began to cool, replaced by something harder to define. Not satisfaction, that was too small a word. Not peace. I'd lost too much for peace. It was completion. The primal satisfaction of the hunt concluded. The prey devoured, justice served cold and calculated. I returned to the office one last time on a gray Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the arrests. The building felt different, quieter. The marble lobby that once intimidated now seemed cheap, trying too hard. Security barely looked up. I wasn't the only former employee coming to collect belongings from the sealed floors. The elevator ride to 38 was solitary. No one else was going to the ghost floors, the ones wrapped in federal investigation tape. A U.S. Marshal sat by the entrance, checking my approved visitor pass with bored efficiency. 15 minutes, he said. Only personal items. The office was a crime scene frozen in time. Coffee cups, still on desks. Their contents now moldy. Whiteboards covered with strategic plans for a future that would never arrive. The walls of executive photos remained. But someone had drawn devil horns on Brad's portrait in red marker. My cubicle looked exactly as I'd left it. The same motivational calendar still showing April. The same plant. somehow still alive despite 6 weeks without water. The box of personal items I'd packed sat untouched, but I wasn't there for the box. I walked to Brad's office. The door was open, crime scene tape crossing the threshold. I didn't enter. I didn't need to. I just wanted to see it. The massive desk where he'd made the decisions that destroyed careers. The leather chair where he'd sat like a king. The window with its commanding view, now overlooking a kingdom of ruins. Everything was tagged with evidence markers: his computer, Exhibit A, his files, Exhibit B through Z, his awards and commendations. Now ironic decorations in a crime scene. I thought I'd feel something standing there. Triumph. Maybe. Vindication. But there was only emptiness. The hollow echo of a war won at too high a cost. Ms. Morgan? I turned. The marshal was standing behind me. I knew Brad Henderson, he said quietly. Played golf with him once. Thought he was a good man. I waited for the accusation, the judgment. Thank you, he said instead. My mother's pension was with one of those funds. You saved her retirement. I nodded, unable to speak. Back at my cubicle, I picked up the plant and the single photo I'd kept on my desk. My sister and me at her graduation. Before all of this started, everything else could rot with the rest of Stonebridge's corpse. As I walked back through the office, I touched the edge of my old desk. The wood was smooth, worn by years of my hands resting in the exact same spot during phone calls, meetings, moments of frustration. This place had been my battlefield, every cubicle wall a trench, every conference room a no man's land. I'd won the war, but the victory felt like ashes. The plant was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just tired. So deeply, profoundly tired. At the elevator, I turned back one last time. The fluorescent lights flickered over empty desks and dead dreams. Somewhere in this graveyard of ambition were the ghosts of the woman I'd been. Eager, optimistic, believing that hard work and talent would be enough. They called me emotional. Fine. My quiet fury just cost them millions. Billions, actually. When you counted the lawsuits, the market cap destruction, the regulatory fines yet to come. But the real cost was measured in more than money. It was measured in the 3 men who'd never work in finance again. In the culture of corruption that had been dragged into the light. In the dozens of women who'd contacted me through Catherine, saying my story gave them courage to speak up about their own experiences. I rode the elevator down, the plant awkward in my arms. In the lobby, I passed a group of young professionals heading up to job interviews. The building's new tenant was already moving in. They looked so young, so eager. One woman, Asian, early 20s, portfolio clutched to her chest, caught my eye and smiled nervously. I wanted to warn her. Tell her to document everything. To save every email. To never, ever let them call her emotional without consequence. Instead, I just nodded and kept walking. Outside, Denver's spring sun broke through the clouds. The plant's leaves turned toward the light, instinctively seeking warmth after weeks in darkness. I set it on a bench and left it there. Someone else could nurture it back to health. I was done caretaking things that didn't serve me. My phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Morgan, this is Amanda Shaw from the Washington Post. We're doing a feature on corporate whistleblowers and would love to. I deleted it without reading the rest. Then I deleted Catherine's follow-up requests for interviews, Thomas's invitation to speak at a conference, Director Harrison's check-in about additional testimony. I was done being the woman who brought down Stonebridge Capital, done being the cautionary tale or the inspirational story, done being anything but myself, whoever that was now. The downtown streets were busy with lunch traffic, people rushing to meetings, deals, the next urgent crisis. None of them looked up at the Stonebridge building. Yesterday's scandal was already becoming background noise, replaced by newer outrages, fresher disasters. That's how it should be. Evil exposed, justice served, world moving on. I walked to my car, got in, and drove away from downtown Denver for the last time. In the rearview mirror, the building shrank until it was just another piece of the skyline, indistinguishable from all the other towers of glass and steel where similar crimes were probably happening right now. My phone rang. Brad's lawyer, according to the caller ID, probably calling to threaten me with a countersuit or beg for mercy in my testimony. I let it ring. They still didn't understand. This was never about winning. It was about making sure that when they fell so hard, so publicly, so completely that every man who thought about dismissing a woman as emotional would remember what happened here. The fury was quiet now, its work complete, but it would never fully disappear. It had become part of me, woven into my DNA. A sleeping dragon that would wake if ever someone tried to diminish me again. I drove toward the mountains, toward something new, unknown, unplanned. For the first time in 2 years, I had no documents to review, no evidence to catalog, no battles to fight. Just the open road and the quiet satisfaction of a fury well spent. They called me emotional. My quiet fury just cost them everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Ava's journey. What would you have done in her situation? Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who might need to hear them.